she turned around to my mum and she said, 1, all gay men do not have AIDS. And she said, 2, the fact that they're gay means they're not fucking likely to shag her.
Hello, I am Kay Anderson and you are listening to Lost Spaces, the podcast that mourns the death of queer nightlife. Every episode, I talk to a different person about a venue from their past, the memories they created there, and the people that they used to know. On today's episode, we are visiting the northern English city of Sheffield, home of the world's oldest football club. I mean, who knew that? I didn't know that. And legendary bands such as Pulp, Moloko, and the Human League. The lost space we are finding out about is the Cossack, a tiny pub in the city centre that was open for around 30 years from the early 70s up until the early noughties. I caught up with drag artist, DJ, community worker and activist Heather Paterson to find out about her first days in Sheffield and how she found the pub and her tribe.
I mean, I moved to Sheffield for uni, and I think my accent still 20 odd years later gives me away as a Scouser. But I came to Sheffield, 18 years old, didn't know anyone else. Before I moved to Sheffield, I wasn't out, but I knew I was gay from probably primary school age. But you always have that thing of, obviously growing up in the 80s, 90s, it wasn't necessarily as accepted. We had Section 28, but you just had personally, you were like, I've got friends and family who've known me since I was born. If any of them took it badly, and I've got to deal with the sort of fallout of that. So I'd sort of decided long before uni that sort of when I moved to Sheffield, I didn't know anyone, so I wasn't bothered about their reactions. So it was like I came out sort of literally day one. I was like, people are going to meet me as a gay woman. So I was like this really giddy sort of 18-year-old who sort of appeared and was like, hi, I'm Heather, I'm a lesbian. And I was like, as quite a sort of conscious decision, because it's not going to upset me getting a bad reaction from someone I don't know. But then if I meet someone, get to know them and then come out later,
yeah, and
then they react badly. So I did that sort of quite consciously.
So what did that feel like then?
Yeah, I think the idea of doing it now would be terrifying. But at 18, when you sort of, you can take on the world, I had that sort of...
but there's just, there's also there's just so much change at that time, isn't there? Like you're moving to a different city.
Yeah, so I just moved away first time away from home. And it was all sort of a big adventure. So I did that, and then I was like, okay, that's great. I've sort of moved into my new shared house, met these people, come out to them, but I'm in a house full of straight people. Told the people on the course who, to my knowledge, were all straight. They weren't, but at that point I believe they were. And I've been here a couple of months and was like, right, I actually need to go. So I've found
what? So
the paper.
So you spent the first few months just telling everyone you were a lesbian, but not being a practicing lesbian.
Yeah, because there was I was just in a house full of straight people, on a uni course full of straight people. I was like, where are the gays? And so I've been here not a huge amount of time, maybe 2 months or something, and I've found because we didn't the internet did exist, but not in the way that, I'm not quite that old, but not in the level that it does now. There was, we didn't have social media really, or, I think I had a MySpace profile, but there wasn't really, the level of sort of a Facebook events listing or things. So it was a bit more difficult to find things. So I found a student newspaper that had some listings, and it listed the Cossack as a venue. And I was like, oh, we've got a gay bar. And I remember going there for the first time. So I'd sort of decided, right, I'm going to go. Went on my own. My housemates were like, yeah, that's great, but we're not going to a gay bar. you go off. So 18 years old, rocked up to this pub. and so sat myself at the bar. The only person who spoke to me all night was Alison, who worked behind the bar, and the only thing that she said to me was "same again." So I was like, I sort of turned up at about 8 o'clock, sat there till about 11, just sort of drinking cheap lager. No one spoke to me, and I was like, right, I'm probably never going to go out on the scene again. This was a awful, terrible idea. And then just as I was leaving, and intending to just go home, two guys sort of stopped me on the way out and was like, "Oh, are you going to Planis?" And I was like, "What's that?" And it was a gay club up in Attercliffe, which is just a couple of miles out of the centre, which is where the sort of what was the scene was based. So it never used to be in the city centre. It was stuck out on an industrial estate. So I was like, I think I was just so pleased that someone had spoken to me, and I had a couple of pints down me by this point, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I'll come with you." And they blatantly just wanted someone to split a taxi fare with, so I got a taxi with them to the club, paid myself in, they instantly disappeared.
Aww.
And so I was like, well, I'm here now and I've literally just paid to get in, and I'm going to have to get a taxi home, so I may as well have a drink. Got a drink, walked in, and there was a little like seating bit, and there was sort of one table that had like a spare seat, and I was like, "Oh, can I sit here?" Got talking to that group that was on that table, one of which was Casey, who became my first girlfriend, who I met that night. So suddenly, and all that group were really involved in, they used to run the monthly gay night at Sheffield University. One of them was a drag queen, one of them was a nightclub dancer. So I sort of got adopted by this really outgoing group of scene queens who were like, "Let us show you the world." And it was like, if I'd not gone to that club and had that one extra drink. So yeah, that
thank
was
you to those
sort of
tight gay men who didn't want to pay a full cab fare.
yeah. So that was my like first thing, and then obviously I was like, yeah. So I sort of made a couple of friends, and then Cossack was always your local because it was open 7 nights a week. It was the one that was in town that was open sort of early doors, that you could sort of, it was pretty much on the university campus. So that was our sort of local haunt.
So let's cycle back to that first night and plucking up the strength and the courage to go in, because I think that's kind of a very common queer experience. Like, I don't have any friends, I'm gonna have to like figure this out and be brave and go on my own. Did you stride in bravely, or did you kind of go around the block a few times?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had a lot sort of got on in my head, but you know, it wasn't the first time I'd gone to the pub, and it wasn't the first time that I'd sort of been there early to sort of meet some friends. So I think it was maybe more remaining there. So walking in, going to the bar, getting a pint was kind of okay, because that's what you would do anywhere else. But it's then when you finished your pint, no one's turned up to join you, no one's spoken to you, and getting that second pint. And not just walking out and like looking like you've been stood up or you've got no mates. And I was just like, yeah, didn't have, like, at that point you didn't have smartphones or anything. I had like a Nokia 3210, so I think I was like sat playing Snake.
Snake.
It wasn't like you could even scroll through like Facebook or whatever. It was like,
I mean, that sounds like a good night to me, sitting and playing Snake.
Yeah, it's fine. And like Cossack was really, you know, it's not a big venue at all, or it wasn't a big venue. It's really strange now to see, because it's been demolished and there's just a patch of grass where it was. Oh. And when you see the actual footprint of it, and you sort of think of all the nights that we had in there and going, we had a lot of like big nights out on this really small few meters square of grass. and it seems even smaller now it's been demolished. But it was nice because you got to know, like, at that point everyone knew everyone, so there wasn't, in terms of the number of people who went out on the scene, there weren't a lot of people. So once you did know people, you go in and all the locals knew each other. So it was, anywhere else, if you went on a night out, you'd arrange to meet friends and be like, we're going to this place at this time. The Cossack, you didn't, because it was there was maybe a rotating pool of, I guess, 200 people. So you'd walk in and you'd know pretty much everyone in the bar. So you never thought, oh, shall I arrange to, you might have said to someone, oh, I'll see you at the weekend or whatever, but you'd just turn up and you'd know everyone. So it was really nice as sort of it did have a bit of a sort of local, villagey, family sort of feel because it was such a small community at that point who were out. And
so what do you think, so just picking up on that, do you think that given now that it's more accepted to be out, there are more people who are out, and so the scene is bigger? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, so it's like the idea now of me just going, say, to Dempsey's, which is our longest sort of established bar stroke club that's still open in town. Like, if I just walked in there, other than the staff, I wouldn't be guaranteed of knowing anyone else in there. Whereas when I walked into the Cossack, like, everyone knew everyone. There wasn't a, because it, like I say, because it was such a small pool of people. So it does have a different feel to it. But obviously, it's a lot better now that more people are, do feel comfortable being out, and there are more people going out, and that's obviously, much, much better. But there is like a little bit of you that sort of, I think a friend of mine phrased it really crudely, but there was an element of truth in it. It was like, oh, I preferred it when it was a little private club. They'll just let anyone in nowadays. And I was like, but just referring back to that time when it was that like really small, I mean, everyone knew everyone's business, and it was like, it was the centre of gossip, and, it's that bit of, you don't want to sort of, I don't want to encourage stereotypes, but there was a lot of that sort of bitchy, gossipy, but in a good-natured way. But it was I think it was just that nature because, oh, did you hear what he got up to last weekend? Or, it was that sort of, because everyone knew each other, there was that sort of gossipy element to it. But,
and were you ever the subject of gossip?
Of course not. I was a kid.
So can we talk a bit more about who you were at that time? So you'd moved to Sheffield, you'd had this big like Diana Ross I'm coming out moment, and on your very first night out on the queer scene, you got a girlfriend.
Yeah.
What was that liberation like?
Very short lived. I think we went out for about 3 months. But when you're 18, like 3 months
a long
is
time.
Like a long time. They make it past breakfast at that age.
Did that then empower you to come out to your family?
I actually I came out to my sister, but to my parents, I came out to accidentally. So I came out, I was elected the following year as LGB officer at Hallam Uni. And so when I sent an email, my signature on my email automatically came up, Heather Paterson, LGB officer. And I only know the result of this conversation because my kid sister was still living at home and witnessed the conversation and got straight on the phone to me, laughing her socks off to tell me. So one time I'd just emailed home, and whenever I emailed home, I used to delete the LGB officer bit off the bottom of my signature. And one time I just forgot. So I'd emailed of like, hi, Mum and Dad, this is my exam results, or whatever it was that I was sending that was parent friendly. And apparently how it went was my dad got the email because my mum doesn't do technology, and she stood over his shoulder sort of reading the email, not getting too close to sort of anything technological. And they're reading through, and it gets to the bottom, Heather was an LGB officer. And she's like, what's LGB stand for? And apparently my dad was like, turned around and went, lesbian, gay, bisexual. And she's like, does that mean our Heather? She's not, is she? And he's like, isn't it fucking obvious? So, and I was like, prior to moving to Sheffield, like I was a walking stereotype. I'd shaved my head. I lived in I had a skinhead Doc Martens dungarees. I was every, I think I'd just decided that in my head, it was like, I'm coming out, I've got to adopt the dress code.
Well, you got to try it on, yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, Yeah, and my dad had blatantly, like, although I hadn't come out to them, my dad had clearly twigged. And it's like that. So my mum's like, oh, that doesn't mean our Heather is. And my dad's like, isn't it obvious? He's like, she's like, no, Mike, what do you mean? She's like, well, what about the posters on a wall, like when she was a teenager? And she's like, what do you mean? It's like, well, she had like posters of like Courtney Love and Shirley Manson and things. She's like, in the underwear. And she's like, and my mum's like, I thought she just liked the music. And my dad's like, she liked Metallica, but there were no pictures of them in their undercrackers, were there? So that was so I came out to my parents accidentally on an email.
But that's interesting. So your dad was like, yeah, whatever's, like, I knew already, and your mum, it was a bit of a shock. Was she like, was she okay with it?
She was. She did the, like, I think, really awkward mum thing of being like, I think she just didn't get it, and she tried really hard to be too cool about it. So, like, I'd go and visit, and then suddenly she'd be
put
like,
on the Indigo Girls.
She'd put the telly on and be like, what do you think to her? What do you think to her? And I was like, Mum, if I was straight, I wouldn't be chatting to people that I fancy, you know. And it was like, yeah, so she was quite sort of, she clearly found it difficult. Like, my mum's quite quite sheltered, I think. And
so was she like, oh, she's pretty, isn't she? She's hot.
Yeah, so she was just trying like, in a really cringy way to be like, which is nice, I guess, you know what I mean? Like, it was clearly completely out of her experience, and she tried a bit too hard to be really cool with it, and just wasn't. But, I mean, my dad works at the university in Liverpool. A lot of his friends are students. He's quite politically active. He does a lot of trade union stuff. So he had a much more varied friendship group and experience, and, you know, wasn't too fazed by it. I think not being too fazed. I think, if anything, because he's quite a sort of banner waving trade unionist and stuff. I think he was quite pleased to go, well, that's, you know, sort of another flag for him to wave. I think if I came out as a black, Jewish, disabled lesbian, he would have been even happier. Yeah, he's great, my dad. So he was fine. Like I said, I think my dad probably knew before I did.
Yeah. So. It's kind of anticlimactic though, isn't it? When you're like, oh, I'm not going to tell them, and I'm going to, like, keep it a secret. And then when it does come out, they're like, oh yeah, no worries. Yeah, no worries. I knew. And you're like, oh, damn. We've wasted all that energy.
And then, like, I'd just come out to my sister on a bus. She was like, we were just catching up, and she was like, oh, you going out with anyone? I was like, oh, yeah, have you pulled or whatever? And I was like, oh, yeah, I am seeing someone. She's like, oh, what's he called? And I was like, Casey. And she's like, what? She's like, yeah, cheers for just dropping that to me just on the number 10 into town. but I kind of knew that my sister wasn't going to care. Like, you know, she was going to be fine with it. So it wasn't you know, we had that sort of brief moment of a bit of a laugh. But she was like, yeah, I was never really massively concerned that she was going to take it badly or anything.
And then what happened with, like, the wider family? Because at the top of the conversation you were saying that was kind of one of the things that you were worried about.
Yeah, well, I think I was concerned about my mother, because I knew that she was, and like I say, she was awkward. She was fine, but she was awkward about it. It was outside experience. My granddad I never came out to. He passed a few years ago now, and I just think, to be honest, I just think he was at a point in life where I don't see what the benefit to it would have been. That, you know, he wouldn't have really got it. He was quite sort of old school, and sort of at the age he was in early onset dementia and things. And I was like, you know, coming out to someone once is one thing, but I don't want to do it 20 times repeatedly, you know, in the nicest sort of way. So my granddad was the only person who I never actually came out to. And my friends, I'd sort of, because I was in Sheffield by that point, I sort of came out by text or phone call to them. And again, the reality was that they were all actually fine, but I'd not known whether they would be or not, so I had been sort of concerned about that. And again, to be honest, from my friendship group's reaction was, tell us something we don't know. I was like, well, why didn't you say that? Why? And we're like, well, we thought that you should tell us when you're ready. Like, it's not. I was like, well, you could have just told me that you already knew. So, like, yeah, so yeah, it was like quite anticlimactic. I think I was, very fortunate because a lot of people don't have that. My response ranged from sort of awkward indifference to really well received, or just whatever, we don't care, it's fine. So I was quite fortunate to not have any really negative responses.
It's that thing though, isn't it? Like, it's not, because it isn't always that someone just says, oh, I can't believe that you're queer, like, I don't want anything to do with you. And sometimes it is more of just drifting apart, or like them making less of an effort, or things happening kind of gradually.
Yeah, and I think it was just like, it's that thing of like, they could take it really horrendously, it could just change our relationship, or and it's that unknown, isn't it, of like, if you don't know how someone's going to react. So I was like, well, I'll just wait till there's 70 miles between us, and then if it does go wrong, then it's, well, I've moved now, and it doesn't matter, and I don't have to see him again if I don't want to. But yeah, it was all fine. But yeah, and it obviously, like I said, I know that a lot of people have different experiences. I think there's definitely an element of, definitely at that time, I think, had I been a gay man, that would have been a different issue. I think definitely that.
Oh, tell me more about that. What do you mean?
I think just for our age group, like, we grew up through the sort of 80s, 90s peak of AIDS crisis, a lot of sort of homophobia in the media. I think with gay women, the issue was more a lack of recognition, that we didn't feature in the conversation one way or the other. We didn't exist, which obviously is problematic in itself. But for gay men, it was, well, you're going to be at risk of AIDS, you're promiscuous, there was a lot more anti-gay male sentiment. Whereas for gay women, it was more that we didn't exist and we weren't acknowledged. So both are problematic. But I think certainly in my experience, and thinking of like friendship groups, the people who got the get out of my house responses were young gay men.
Did you have any, in thinking about that kind of lack of representation, in the kind of the lack of visibility of queer women, did you have anyone say to you, like, you just need to find the right man? Because that's gross.
No, not really. I think probably the most awful one I got, and again from and like, I'll tell stories about my mother because she's never going to go online or hear anything about them. But,
brilliant.
Another one that came second hand from my sister, because when I did move to uni and I came out, and my mum did know that I had a lot of gay friends, and most of my friendship group were gay men, and I think my mum just thought, for want of a better term, that I was a fag hag. That she just thought that I was a straight woman with a lot of gay male friends. It didn't occur to her that I was part of that scene myself. And there was one time, the most ignorant statement, but I could understand the context of the time. But she turned around to my sister and said, "I'm really worried about Heather having all of these gay friends. What if she gets AIDS?"
How?
In absolutely pure ignorance. But you can imagine, like, at the time, that was, the media narrative, wasn't it? And my sister has a wonderfully blunt way with words. So my 15-year-old kid sister at the time turned around, and I apologise for swearing, but I'm just to quote her.
Go ahead.
She turned around to my mum and she said, 1, all gay men do not have AIDS. And she said, 2, the fact that they're gay means they're not fucking likely to shag her. And I was like, I'm going to remember that quote till the day I die. I was like, this is brilliant. But I was like, you could have explained things to it in a subtle, gentle way, but, bull in a china shop will do the trick.
Well, sometimes you need a sharp object.
But I think it is, like, ignorance in the pure sense. Like I say, it's just an entire world outside of our experience. And that was our experience growing up, that, I was 20, I think, when Section 28 was repealed. So I went through my entire schooling where they weren't allowed to mention that queer people existed. And the only thing that you did have was, do you remember the awful AIDS advert with the tombstone? And that was the only thing. So, like, gay people didn't exist, but if they did, the only gay people who existed were gay men who were going to get AIDS and die. And that was what you were told about, publicly about being gay when you were young. And it was like, yeah. So that it was like a sort of, a weird and sort of frightening time and stuff to go, because you didn't have the internet. I had the, we're going really off on a tangent from talking about Cossack, but I remember going on CFAX, as it was at the time, the old teletext.
Oh, I don't see. So I didn't grow up in the UK, so I don't know.
So teletext was on your TV, and you just pressed a button. And it's like the equivalent of pressing the red button. And it was a really sort of pixelated text thing that had like a news page and a holidays page and various categories. It was the closest thing that you had to the internet, but it was just a sort of static info site. And one of the pages, there was a dating site that was sort of like personals ads. And there was a gay section on it that had like 3 people on it or something, and they were all about 40. And so it wasn't like you were ever going to... But I remember going on there as a teenager and looking just to go, there's some people out there. There's a little section of men who are looking for men and women who are looking for women. This is an actual thing. It's not just me being a complete freak of nature.
And so was your TV in your living room? So was that terrifying?
No, you just look on it when... Yeah, I didn't go on and look when my parents were in the room.
No, but like if they were kind of lingering around in the kitchen or in other rooms, or was it just like when they were out, you'd secretly turn it on
when they weren't there? But that was like a really weird thing. And then when I was a bit older, I discovered Diva magazine, and I used to go and we used to have a big branch of Smiths in town. That was pretty much like a reading library. There would be people lined up across the magazine rack who just stand there, read the magazine, pretty much cover to cover, put them back and walk out. So I used to go in when I was sort of in my mid-late teens, sort of a bit later on, I'd discovered Diva magazine, and I'd go in and just read. I could never buy it and take it home, but I'd go in and have a look and go.
But you were brave enough to read it in the shop. You weren't worried about people seeing you.
No, because I didn't know them, and it wasn't like, again, if I'd been in the shop with my parents, I wouldn't have been looking at it, but it was like, just some random people in town I wasn't sort of bothered about. So
I used to, so when I would go to the newsagent and look at their gay magazines, there was always so many naked men in them that I couldn't just look at it in the newsagent because it's it's close to pornography.
See, the women's magazine, it was like mullets and folk festivals. It wasn't
the dream.
It wasn't the same level of porn content.
Well, luckily things are changing. So let's go back to Cossack, which sounds like you were in an episode of Cheers every time you went there.
And it was, like I say, it was just your local. It was your 7 nights a week. It was open 7 days a week, and we were probably in there 4 or 5 of them. It was, like I say, probably not healthy to spend that much time in the pub, but that was where I never really bothered going to the student union because that was, Cossack was next door, so that was where we'd call in at lunchtime sometimes, or it was just, that was where we all sort of pretty much lived. So we did know. So it was you knew all of the staff there, and so even if you, on the odd occasion that you did go in and it was dead or there wasn't someone that you knew as a punter, you knew the staff anyway, so you could just go and sit and prop up the bar and natter to them.
Have a chat, yeah.
Yeah, so it was almost our sort of second front room type vibe. So we were, and we'd be feet up on the tables. There were times we called pizza in, it was but yeah, it was, I mean, the early day, I think how much it changed just in those few years. When I first started going there, it's just across the road from the train station. So on match days, you'd have lots of sort of football supporters coming past. And on match days, they used to lock the pub, or they'd lock the front, and you had to go to the back door and knock on the back door to be let in, and you'd be only let in if you were known to them.
Oh, wow. And so is that because like there was hooliganism and stuff?
Yeah, just because, a visible gay bar right on the bit where all the match supporters would be going past en masse. They didn't trust a fight to spill in or someone to throw something, so they just shut the front and lock the front doors. So you had that little sneaky just going round the back.
and like prove your gayness, your queerness.
Yeah. Like I say, basically, because we pretty much everyone knew each other, it was like, it was like you just go round to the back and it's like, oh, it's you, come in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, that was 99 that I moved to Sheffield, and I think it was 2004, it was demolished. So I had that sort of 3-4 years there. And it, like I say, it was at the time, it was the only city centre gay venue. And everything else there were other venues, but they were out at Attercliffe. And there was a monthly gay night at the university, and there was a monthly Poptastic, which is a Manchester night, but they did a once a month night in Sheffield. So they used to be your sort of big nights out. But yeah, I mean, I remember so you had that sort of like it being the centre of the scene, and then it being, as other places opened and things started to move into town, it sort of, and more people came out, this little sort of old man pub wasn't necessarily the highlight anymore. And but yeah, I mean, my core friendship group now, my best mate, I met from a night in Cossack like 21 years ago, and is still my best friend to this day.
Oh, wow.
So it's really, I think really that concept of, I'd moved away to uni from family and wasn't necessarily rejected, like say they were cool with it, but I didn't have like that close. I go back a couple of times a year and stuff. Some of my friendship group had quite fractious sort of active rejections and separations from family, and there is that sort of chosen family that we sort of refer to, and that we so we think of each other as brothers and sisters, so we are like really tight knit, and we, like I say, we all sort of met in the Cossack back in the day, and now I'm met at 18, I'm 40 this year, and we're still that sort of tight knit, and other sort of relationships and things have come and gone, but that like little sort of family unit that we established has sort of remained a couple of decades later. So I think that's partly why I probably look back on sort of at the Cossack with rose tinted glasses, because
that's
come
enormous.
out of it. Yeah,
that's huge to like have met all those people that you've maintained that relationship with for ages.
Yeah, and I think at the time, like obviously, your teenage years, your early 20s, when life's a bit more chaotic. I mean, I don't think I'd ever see myself as being like, I'm quite sort of settled now. My 18-year-old self will probably describe me as quite boring, comparatively.
Don't listen to her.
No, I mean, and to be fair, the line of work and the stuff that I do, like I still do drag and DJ and do things, but I'm not as excessive as my teen self was. But yeah, I don't think you can imagine when you're young. I don't think you can imagine yourself being like, you think when you're 18, you think 30 is ancient, and it's like, but I think in that same way that you look back and you view that time differently to how it maybe was at the point that you were experiencing it.
So with that in mind then, if you could go back in time and go to the Cossack, sit next to the 18-year-old self at the bar, what would you say?
Oh God, I probably sound like my parents would be telling me to rein it in a bit.
Aren't you cold in that top? Yeah.
What are you wearing? And 12 pints is not a reasonable amount to drink. I'll probably just tell myself off. But no, do you know what? I think I was enjoying myself, and I was getting to know myself, and I was making friends, and it was, you know, I was really fortunate, I think, from that first night to meet that group that really sort of took me under their wing and sort of introduced me to everyone, and sort of getting adopted into sort of a group who knew everyone and had quite a large social circle and were really sort of actively involved in nightlife and stuff. You know, if the person that I'd happened to sit next to and got chatting to was an accountant who, you know, who went out once a week and was not like, you know, not casting aspersion on accountants, but, you know, the people that I happened to meet were really outgoing, active nightlife people. So it was like, suddenly you're in this group where everyone you know is a DJ or a drag queen or a nightclub promoter, or, you know, and it's like, you're into this sort of really full-on world that's sort of quite hedonistic, and, you know, and it was like the bit where you look back now and go, I'm not entirely sure how all of us survived. And actually, on a serious note, from fortunately not any of my close friends, but actually from my extended friendship group, not all of us did survive on like a sort of slight, completely less amusing note, that like actually some people, there were a number of amongst the people that we knew, there were a few drug overdoses and suicides, and people who, you know, did have a tough time. But yeah, I mean, I was probably a decade too late to fully experience the sort of AIDS crisis. So some of our older friendship group had sort of had that experience of losing a lot of people to HIV and AIDS, and I think there was a sort of follow on of like, from the sort of couple of decades of AIDS crisis, there was then another decade of like really hedonistic, really going for it, living life, hardcore partying, and I think I entered that window. And so there was a lot of heavy partying.
But like alongside that partying, I guess there's also this layer of shared trauma, isn't there? That everyone's kind of anesthetizing.
Yeah, because there were a lot of people amongst that group, like I say, who didn't necessarily have accepting families, who didn't have like great experiences, and that, you know, there was a lot of, you know, there was something behind the party. And I think for a lot of people who were, you know, either you're drowning your sorrows, or even if you take the positive view, it's like you've got this newfound
freedom,
adopted family and scene to celebrate, or, you know, probably less black and white, some sort of mix of both. So, and like I say, it was that sort of, anything goes. I mean, some of the stuff that I think a lot of us were sort of, I was 18 because obviously I'd moved to Sheffield for uni, but there was a lot of, because there isn't any other LGBT social space, there were a lot of underage people. So like some of my friends that I met, so some of my best friends now, I was 18, but actually they were maybe 16, they were college students. You know, there was a lot of sort of underage drinking. There was a lot of, actually, going out now, whether it's there, I don't see it, or I go to less heavy party type venues, but the level of drug use was really extreme in some of the venues. Was like, I mean, there was one club that we used to go to where there were literally people doing lines off the bar. Like, it was that level of blatant.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so I think a lot of that, and I'm sure, like, you know, there's house parties and there's raves and there's clearly scenes where, that does still happen, but I don't think, in public bars and clubs it's maybe quite to the same level.
Mm-mm. Yeah, and I guess that's the tough thing, isn't it? That in terms of community, in terms of the scene, for such a long time, those were the only places where you were able to find people that were part of your community. And so you either had to like be the boring person with a glass of water, which is me, or like drink and like get into it, and then drinking can lead to other things. But at the same time, yeah, there's something like that hedonism and
Yeah.
that exploration that's so useful for finding out who you are and what your limits are and what you like and forging your character.
Yeah, and it was like, and like I say, going back now, though, like those people that are still my sort of closest friends are the people that I was having the, 3-4 o'clock in the morning, let's talk about the universe conversations with.
Oh no, those never go well.
Yeah. But it is like, there is that sort of like, you did connect with people like and form those really sort of close bonds, and I think, yeah, being able to keep those so many years later is brilliant. But if I'd have never gone to the Cossack, I'd have never met the people who I then went to the LGBT student committee with. I'd have never then been elected as LGBT officer. I'd have never started getting involved in LGBT youth work. I'd have never got involved in the other areas of that scene. And actually, I can probably, track almost entirely the work that I do now. I could probably map it back to starting in the Cossack because I'd have never, I wouldn't have known there was an LGBT sector to work in. I wouldn't have met those people. I wouldn't have made those connections. I actually, and I probably shouldn't admit to this, my first ever LGBT job was actually the result of a Cossack bet. So I met a guy, Steve, who got chatting to in the pub, and he was running for LGB officer at the uni. I didn't even know such a thing existed. And I was like, why are you doing it? I could do that. And just as a drunken bet, I decided to stand against him. I was like, what have you got to do? You've got to get 3 people to nominate you. Right, you 3, you'll nominate me, won't you? And it was a drunken bet in the pub for a laugh to run against him, and I got elected. And I was like, oh God, what do I do now?
So you shattered his dreams.
He got it. He did it the following year. He took over from me.
Okay.
Yeah, we became quite good friends. But yeah, that was I ran against him as the result of a drunken bet in the Cossack. And I was like, I'm not losing a bet. Didn't know anything about it, and then I ended up like organising the weekly LGBT committee, actually it was LGB committee then. We hadn't.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, because you keep saying LGB. Were there debates at the time about the T, or did that happen after you were in that role?
It literally, we were the year that had the discussions about it, and it happened the year or two after. So we did have the discussions about whether we should be adding the T or not. Because at that time, most things were LGB. Actually, quite a few were still LG. Quite a few didn't.
Wow.
So we were still at a point where the B was relatively new.
Wow.
It
seems so nuts, doesn't it?
Yeah, so lots of the groups and organisations and societies and stuff still just described them as lesbian and gay. So they didn't. So the B was still relatively new, and we were starting to talk about the T, and then that got added a year or two later. So yeah, we were just at that sort of end of, and we had there were trans people and but there were people who were attending the groups and were actively involved. It just, we hadn't renamed them, so we were trans inclusive in practice, but we'd not course up in going, actually our name doesn't reflect what we're doing anymore.
Yeah. So it's so fascinating though that like these kind of debates were happening in universities like a decade or 20 years ago. Do you remember hearing about the Cossack closing?
Yes, I was in there when it closed.
On the last night?
Yeah.
What happened?
They let us take a few things. So, one of the bar stools is in my friend's flat. Some of the optics from behind the bar, they were like, because they were literally going to be chucking stuff in a skip and demolishing it. We blatantly said, well, can we take some souvenirs? And they were like, well, if you can carry it, you can have it.
Oh, wow.
So there were a few sorts of bar stools and bits and pieces that were claimed as bits of memorabilia. So between us, we've got various bits of old Cossack memorabilia kicking about in our houses.
And what did you get to keep?
I've not ended up with anything. I think I did probably take a couple of bits at the time. I used to have in my house, in my student house at the time, that we stuck up in our bathroom. We took there was a little flame sign, the zero drugs tolerance beside the toilet, and we stuck it in the bathroom of our student house. But yeah, we claimed various sorts of posters and ashtrays and bits that, little bits that you could sort of carry.
Oh.
But yeah, I remember seeing it when it was, because I worked just across the road, so I remember going past when it was demolished, and I was just like, so I did actually see it coming down.
Oh, wow.
So, but yeah, there's still, where it was is now just a patch of grass, and actually in the summer we still have, like, if it's a nice day, we'll go and sit and have a couple of drinks on the patch of grass where Cossack used to be.
Remembering. Oh, that's a nice way to honour the place.
Well, it's in the middle of the city centre, and it's people do sit out there, and it's like, well, so we still joke like, oh, shall we go and meet at Cossack? And so we've got it's probably at least once or twice each summer we still end up going and having an afternoon where we sit there and have a bit of a picnic and a few drinks and sort of have a bit of a reminisce of the mischief that we used to get up to.
And so if I were to talk to any of your friends and ask for embarrassing stories about you, what would they tell me?
Probably just about ridiculous outfits, drunken karaoke, falling over. I don't think I did anything particularly outlandish. I think I definitely had an interesting fashion sense. I do drag now, and I've done it for a number of years, but that kind of ended up happening because I think people thought I did drag, and actually I just have really tacky dress sense.
Did you ever go to the Cossack? Well, if you did, I would love to hear from you. Tell me your stories and share any photos or anecdotes that you have from that time. You can find me across all social media with the username KAndersonMusic. And whilst you're at it, go and give Heather a follow on Twitter. Her username is Heather Paterson. Lost Spaces is not only a podcast, but a concept record as well. I've been writing songs about queer venues and the people who used to live their lives there, and will be releasing songs over the coming year. You can hear the first single, which is called Well Groomed Boys, and is also playing underneath my talking right now on all streaming platforms. If you liked this episode, I would really appreciate if you subscribed, left a review on Apple Podcasts, or just told people who you think might be interested in giving it a little listen too. I am Kay Anderson, and you have been listening to Lost Spaces.